Able to catch some of the conversation with Eric and James in the back room. Yeah. What do you guys think? Do you have any reactions? I mean, let me just turn to you, George. You use data as a way to optimize what companies do. Google has built its business on optimizing data, on treating every single interaction by a user as a signal to do something else. So for example, when lots of people click on the 8th listing of a search query, the algorithm knows to lift the search query to the first or second space so that the user's interactions are reharvested or recycled back into the algorithm to improve the service. Teaching a computer to translate languages is really hard. Google found a way to actually have very good feedback mechanisms. So if users choose one particular translation or another, tells the algorithm the value of that, the performance of that translation, and so Google Translate improves. Where do you guys take this idea of learning from data in your own businesses? Yeah, go for it.
For us, we help large advertisers reach their audiences online with a machine learning system that learns from showing the ads what's working and what's not. Maybe hanging off of a question that got asked at the end of it of, boy, Google, you're so big, how do little players ever kind of work their way in? There are amazing ecosystems right now that have really just evolved in the last few years for digital advertising, where ad space, just one at a time, one little rectangle at a time, whether that rectangle was a banner ad or a video or Facebook and whatnot, they're actually put up for auction in real time about 35 billion times a day that we see. So that's a tremendous amount of information for us to see. Some of those we'll buy. We'll run a luxury ad, a luxury car ad here, a hotel ad there, and then we just measure from here's the hundreds of millions of times we've served this ad. It worked here. It didn't work there. I mean, the definition of here and there is quite diverse. It could be this time of day or to an iPad, but not an iPhone, or on a website that's about cricket scores in India. Whatever it happens to be that's driving the results, the machines can notice that in a way that kind of at a velocity and scale that a group of people trying to study that problem could never have done. And so that generates excellent results from advertisers.
Sharmila, you're nodding as he speaks.
Yeah, I think we come at it at ClearStory Data just one step removed, I'd say, from how George just referred to it. But we think what's really important is for organizations to be able to tap into more sources of external data that are now available that wasn't available that easily 5-6 years ago. And if you look back 5-6 years ago, there were probably less than 50 open data APIs. Now there are about over 7,000. And if companies can harness that data and bring it into the mix with their own private data, they have the ability to actually drive to more interesting insights, including using that data to identify some of the richer opportunities as it relates to ad targeting on mobile devices. In fact, as it relates to that particularly, I believe some of the latest numbers show that if you can actually capture location-based data around individuals, there's about 600 billion in additional consumer spend to tap into. So we believe that one part of this problem is how do you actually harness more sources of data to bring into the mix with your own internal private data to be able to actually iterate and discover opportunities that you couldn't get to before. And that comes back to a question I think someone had in the room at the last session at the very end about this notion of a data marketplace and being able to actually share a lot of this external data that's now available to determine what are high-value trusted sources and worth using and what's not. Because I think there's no question that as the number of sources of external data increase into over 10,000 or so. There's going to be a lot in there that's very dirty data and not appropriate for use. At the same time, there's quite a bit in there that's highly trusted, high-value data. And the question is, how do you create a marketplace where companies can actually share this data and bring into the mix with their private data, knowing what's of high value on the external side, to be able to actually drive to some of the types of targeting solutions that George just talked about.
Right. Now I want to go back to the idea of open data and data marketplaces, but first, Tariq, you use data very effectively. Mm-hmm. Tell us how.
You like to think so.
You like to think so, exactly. So tell us all your secrets.
In 2 minutes or less, right?
No, here we've got 20 minutes.
We've got 20 minutes.
This is financially interesting.
Exactly. So building on the points a little earlier, one of the things that we have at Caesars, which is similar to but different from what Google has, is we have a massive amount of primarily offline data. So we have behavioral data about what you do on the gaming floor, about what you do in our restaurants, retail shops, hotels, what shows you like to see, et cetera. And we've been using that for years in our marketing to really just make sure that the best offer gets to the right customer to incent a trip or a visit. What's really changed recently is two factors. One of them is what Sharmila was just talking about, just the availability of other data. And from our standpoint, we have to be very discreet and very discerning about where you actually, what data you use and where you use that, because we've got this implicit and in some cases explicit understanding with our customers that we are using the data that you volunteer to give us, and we're going to use that to give you value. And that works when it's data that they know they're volunteering. When you start appending other sources of data, that contract to some extent breaks down or at least gets fuzzier, right? And I think that's something that we are being very thoughtful about as you get into this, to say, how do you maintain that implied contract that you've got or that relationship with a customer while you're using all these other sources of data. The other thing that's materially changed the way that we do this is that the feedback loop has become incredibly short, even for offline data. So where you used to be able to send out direct mail and get a response in a couple of weeks, now you're sending out email or a message on a mobile app and you're getting responses in close to real time, if not in real time. And that gives you a lot more ability to action the data than you've had before.
Have you found any interesting correlations by looking at all of this offline data that helps you do your business?
Oh, there's tons of correlations that help you run the business. We have a group of about 200 analysts who do nothing but sift through data and build predictive models in particular. And increasingly
200 people.
200 data analysts who are going.
Where are they
through
based?
This. They're mostly based in Las Vegas. We've got some scattered around the country and a couple overseas. But for the most part, they're based in Las Vegas, and they spend their whole time sifting through the data, looking for correlations, arguing about causation versus correlations, and building predictive models and increasingly simulations to say what will actually happen if we take this marketing action or if we change the layout of the casino floor in this way.
So can you give us an example, a practical, real-life example of something you've learned that would be kind of surprising from a correlation? Like, I'll give you one great example. Have you found out that, for example, fish eaters are easy marks and suckers, but vegetarians clean up at blackjack?
I have no comment on that question. But more broadly than that,
sure.
So to that point, actually, we have found that, and this is a very intuitive comment that won't surprise a lot of people in the audience, but if you have someone who in our restaurants has never ever ordered red meat and you send them an offer for a steakhouse with a picture of a steak, your response rate's going to be lower, right? And you can actually see that in the data, but it's something
you don't need
the
200 people. You could just ask me
exactly,
that question.
You can ask you that, exactly. So that's not one of these counterintuitive ones,
sure.
But that is something that you can see. There's luck obviously plays a strong role in the casino industry for obvious reasons. And it's fairly intuitive that if you have a bad experience, if you come in, you roll the dice once and you lose all your money, that you're not going to be happy and you're not going to come back. And so we've known that, and we've done things historically to action that. So if you lose in a single trip significantly faster than you should, you'll often have someone approach you on the casino floor and offer to buy you dinner, offer to get you tickets to the Celine Dion show, or whatever it is, just to make your experience last longer so that you feel like you got more value from it.
So if any of us lose, the thing to do is to shout, "Oh man, it's my first time in Vegas and I've lost." And then,
on the contrary, they know if it's
you
your
have
first
to
time.
see it in the data, exactly. So you can't do that because this is all triggered off of the data that we see in the slot machines at the tables. So you need the slot machine to yell for you. But what we noticed in the data was that small losses that we thought, frankly, were not readily visible to customers, but over a longer period of time. So not one trip, but 10 trips. If you see someone who is, and we've got ways of quantifying luck, but 10% unlucky, so not significantly unlucky over a sustained number of trips, that those people are actually significantly more likely to defect to one of my competitors than they are to stay with me. And so you can start to action that, you can start to message it, but the thing you don't want to do is call up and say, "Hey buddy, I see you've been unlucky, come on back," right? So we have to think, you have to think carefully about how you actually then intervene.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about how we camouflage it, but yeah.
I was just saying, in terms of wacky patterns, we had a CPG company, we were just marketing pickles online, and they were just sure they wanted us to show this ad to pregnant women. And it's funny, in the model, so we build kind of in an autonomous, with an autonomous system, we build one, you can think of it, one giant model for all of our campaigns, where it's equivalent to having individual models for each campaign. So we don't have data scientists doing that, it's just kind of a machine. But now and then we look at the machine, and you can sort all the patterns by strength, in terms of how much they're helping, how much they're hurting. And it was like the #2 worst pattern of all time was trying to show that pickles ad to pregnant women. So we figured either they don't really care about pickles, or if they do, they don't want to take the time to download a coupon online to go get them. It's more an urgent need than that one ad was satisfying. But we've seen other things like, luckily, new parents are bad targets for hard alcohol. That was lovely to see. Take more care of your kids. And then actually, it was a real pattern I mentioned on people checking cricket scores on Indian newspaper sites, but from the US. Turns out that Indian expatriates are excellent targets for luxury cars. And that was something that just kind of popped out that we had never thought to explore.
Now, how do you come up with these insights? Do you have to sort of ask the questions, or do they surface on their own?
And that was just looking at a word cloud. So we looked at the model on a luxury car campaign. You can just ask the system to show you a word cloud of which sites it likes a lot, which sites it hates a lot, and which ones it's kind of indifferent about. And so it was just, actually one of the biggest sites was ndtv.com, and I didn't even know what that was at the time. It's New Delhi TV. And then Hindustan Times, and we started to notice this pattern just by looking at it. So the machine kind of does its own thing. But what we found is that advertisers, they're not happy just to have a black box and for their only answer to be to their boss, "Things got better," who knows why. It's better to say things got better because this partner that we work with detected these patterns and autonomously put it into the media plan for us, and that's why we're getting a better response rate.
So the interesting thing that I find about that is that it was a human being that identified the patterns. You had the technology kind of deliver it in a way that a person could actually tease it out. And in the first panel, there was this fear that people are going to try, that the data is going to dictate everything, and that there'd be no place for human beings, and that intuition experience would just go the wayside. But here, that's actually just the opposite. Human beings were essential. It was, let's hear.
So the machine was already concentrating the campaign that way by itself. It was just, the value of the human here was to tell the story to the customer. And then the customer, of course, can take that, and I mean, it would only be reasonable then to think harder about the Indian, or maybe more broadly Asian expatriate audience as targets that then would cause you to come up with new ads, for example, that would be more tailored for them. But in this case, the machine by itself was already kind of flying the plane towards that.
So what's the purpose of human beings?
What's the purpose of human beings? That's a deep question.
You've got 20 seconds.
I was actually teaching an algorithms class, and one of the students asked in the middle, "What is Buddha?" And I thought, wow. So similar. So in different regimes, I think, the funny thing in AI, the hardest part of the whole thing, so we're finding there's all these regimes now where you can build machines that are better than people at specific disciplines, but common sense is still this thing that's actually very hard to encode. So I think that there's still a lot of human common sense. Another thing would just be, machines aren't smart, so you can accidentally define a problem for them to solve, and they're happy to solve it. And then you realize, oh man, that's actually hurting me to solve that problem well. Meaning, there's still a lot of marketers for my world that want to optimize for clicks. And machines can be great at going off and getting clicks, but you don't even know. It might not be the right audience that's really converting, buying your product, really developing a brand affinity for you. And so we're always having to push them to define the real thing they're trying to solve, not just something in the middle, because it's not always clear that solving some problem kind of in the middle, some proxy, really actually improves their overall result.
Okay.
I think we strongly believe that the human intelligence aspect of this has to remain even as we get to more sophisticated machine learning techniques and systems that have more built-in data intelligence in them. Because what's happening is that a lot of the demands of data is really moving from the back room to the front room. As you know, and in the front room, you're really relying on people with the domain expertise to actually look at the data and know how to make the right decision. And if you try and remove them out of this equation altogether, you don't have the assurance that the right domain expert is actually looking at the information and deducing the right answer. It can be very, very dangerous to just rely on something that a system tells you without the domain expert actually having input into that. And nothing's going to change the fact that it is the humans in the front room that actually have the domain expertise around different pockets of the business and have to play a critical role. So the question, I think, is how do you ensure that as these systems get smarter and bring data to the front room, you also have the right people in front of them that are not necessarily data scientists, but rather have the right domain expertise in order to not make naive decisions. Right. Even if you take a very simple case of some of the new data technologies out there that rely on more sophisticated visualization techniques, even that requires the right domain expert in front of it to make sure that you are taking away the right answer from that visualization. You could have someone looking at something and think that they have found a certain answer in that data, and another person who has a different set of domain expertise come away with a different answer. So we do believe that in order to actually ensure that as data moves to the front room and more systems come out which have smart machine learning techniques integrated in them, the domain experts just have to remain in the equation. What needs to change, however, is their ability to actually get to more of a community effect as to how they look at data. I think, someone brought this up earlier, this whole notion of sharing, and not just sharing data to determine what is the right data to look at and what is not, but also when it comes to the insight, enabling people to collectively come to an insight by looking at the same thing at the same time. You probably, know the recent example, that I'm sure some people here have heard about at the Super Bowl recently during the power outage. There were, of course, lots of advertisers, as always, at the Super Bowl, but there were 4 companies in particular that actually established marketing war rooms during the Super Bowl event itself. And during the power outage, which was an unanticipated event, these 4 companies were literally on the edge of looking at data as it was changing in real time to make decisions. But it was their expertise that allowed them to actually take data as it was coming live on the screen and be able to make the right decision on what ad to target, who to target to, what platforms to put it out on. Oreo did that very well, as you know.
Fantastic.
And it's a fantastic example of, a $40,000 spend yielding more than the $3 million spend in a matter of, just a 15-minute period during an unanticipated event. Without that domain expert in the war room at that time, you could not have come to that conclusion.
So let me take this question and put it up a notch. And actually, we're going to go into Q&A in just a second. So yeah, glad the house lights are up. Get your questions ready. So we have a war room of 200 people at Caesars. That's happening all the time. We have some brands that, for the Super Bowl, created a war room. Your companies or technology vendors that offer services, well, Sharmila and George's case, to companies. Do all companies need a big data war room? Is that just the future? Just like every company has a strategy department?
I think it's more like, at business school, you should learn how to manage people and you should learn how to manage robots. And so I think, these big data systems that try to churn on them, create patterns, even in some cases autonomously take actions. I think it's just a matter of, it's kind of funny, Ken Jennings, when he lost to Watson, kind of funnily wrote, I for one welcome our new robot overlords, but really they're not going to be our bosses, they're going to be our workers, and it's just a matter of learning how to work with them. So I think here it's, not everybody needs to have that expertise internally, but everyone should learn how to be a skeptical and informed customer of these kinds of services and results.
I think the informed consumer of data and analytics is going to be an increasingly important role for not just people in the analytics group, but also CEOs, CMOs, CIOs in companies. I think the single biggest thing I see as I talk to other CMOs is that the ones who are successful at this are the ones who can consume the data well. And actually not just understand how to apply the domain expertise to make the action better, but also understand what the data is telling you and understand the limitations of the analysis.
Great.
I think there are two aspects to this as it relates to, does everyone need to have a war room? I think if you're looking at what we call sort of live situation analysis, where you have a very short window of time to actually act and make a decision, you might need these, small war rooms where people with the right expertise can see the data very quickly and make a decision, so that you're not in danger of, a system making the wrong decision for you when you've got a very short window. So short windows being, a minute, couple minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And for that, I think, companies will continue to have some mini type of war room at times when they need to act this quickly and make the right decision looking at the data in near real time. The other definition of the war room is really just the front room changing, where there's more of a community aspect in how you look at data and breaking the silos that have existed over the last 10 years. And I think that is the other phenomena going on that we see a lot across large organizations now that are globally distributed data teams, where what they're saying is we need to bring these people together almost in a virtual community where they are looking at the data and the same data at the right time to make the decision. So it's not so much a war room, but a community effect that you're creating across the different business units in the company and breaking down the silos versus a live situational analysis where you have a very short period of time to act on and make a decision, which may require certain domain experts gathered together.
So I'm going to open up the floor to questions, and the idea of a short period of time, of course, does typify our conference. Questions, please. Does anyone have the first question? I see a gentleman here, and then is the second question? And a gentleman there is number 2. Please.
This is probably for Tariq, but I welcome other answers as well. Can you talk about how you're using data to actually impact the long-term behavior of the visitor as opposed to just getting them to enact a specific transaction?
Sure. Before you answer, actually, I'd like to collect a couple questions because we are so close to time, and then we'll choose one. Please.
Actually, a very related question again to Tariq. You spoke a little bit about the contract you have with your to add value. The gentleman earlier this morning from Citibank, talked about sharing data with his client, with Home Depot, as a way to create a common data set. What are the limits? What are the limits of data sharing? Wouldn't you like to get your clients, bank information? What are the limits of that? And how does kind of the story of rational decision making, the consumer as a rational decision making, affect how you think about where the limits are?
These are great questions, and I'm killing myself that we have so little time. Is there a third question before I let Tariq answer all of the questions of humanity? I see those who. Tariq, can you do that in 2 minutes? Or 1 minute?
1 minute.
Yeah.
Let me see if I remember them. So in terms of long-term effect, I think that there is a great tendency, and Caesars has been as guilty of this as anyone, of taking data and looking at the short-term impact of the data. So you send out a piece of mail, you send out an offer, and what do you get back? The real, and this is where the humans actually come in and asking the right question is important. So we've had to consciously take a step back and really say, all right, so what is the problem that we're trying to solve? If it's a customer profitability problem, is it on the next trip or is it over 2 years, right? Because you will actually have customers whose behavior evolves over a 2-year period, and we'd like to understand that better. So it really gets to, there's a huge amount of data out there, and you can torture that data in any sort of way. The real question is, or the real art is in asking the right question so that you get the answer out of it. and then being willing to run the experiment. So there's a number of examples, the effect of advertising, of TV advertising, and what have you, is a really good example of the data often not showing you the long-term impact unless you consciously ask that question and say, we're going to run an experiment, it's going to be in Chicago, it's going to be in this zip code, they're going to see these TV ads, in this zip code they're not, and let's look at response over a 9-month period of time to people from those 2 zip codes, right? And you can do that sort of thing now that you really couldn't 5 years ago. So you can start to ask these questions that are quite hard and longer term. You just have to have the patience to wait for the answer to some extent.
The final question was using information from other sources.
Using information, so we
In 30 seconds.
In the Caesars business, we are very, very cautious, probably excessively cautious on this point for 2 reasons. One is that the data that we have, customers would not like us sharing that with other people, generally speaking. I have an example of a woman who gave us her email address 5 years ago, 4 years ago, or something like that, with permission to market, and we hadn't actually done anything with it. It turned out she gave us her son's email address, not her email address, and we all of a sudden started sending her loyalty program statements to her son without knowing it, and she is understandably quite upset about the fact her son now knows about her gambling, vacation, et cetera. Behaviors, right? And that sort of thing happens, and we don't want to cross that line. So we're probably more cautious on this than most other businesses out there. I'd imagine a CPG company has a little less concern around some of these issues than we do. So we have tried to say if the customer knows about this and they would be happy with it, then we're happy to explore it. If the customer would find out about it and say that violates a line, then we actually steer clear of it for the moment.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I'd like to finish more about this, but unfortunately we are out of time. So please join me in thanking the panelists for a fascinating conversation. Thank you.